Hey squad, GooberTroy here. With the release of Swords of Legends Online approaching, we are nearing that point where we have to make that tough decision on which class we want to play. I spent quite a bit of time in the recent betas focusing on trying out each class and spec to get a basic feel and understanding of how their playstyles might differ. In this video series, I will provide a very basic overview of each class and spec, highlighting the core rotational abilities and resources to provide a general understanding of how they feel to play. These videos are meant to be an introduction to each class and provide new players with some knowledge to help determine which class might best fit their playstyle. In the future, I will be putting out some deep dive videos which will function more as full class guides. So if that's something you're interested in, please consider subscribing to the channel so you can be notified when those videos do go live. With that being said, let's take a look at the Berserker. The Berserker, like every class in Swords of Legends Online, has two specs. The first spec we will look at is the Slayer, which is a melee DPS that focuses on charging up your damage for big hits. If you've ever played the Monster Hunter series and used the Greatsword, this spec functions similar to that. In addition, Slayer can summon phantoms which you can command to attack, forming various combos for surprising amounts of damage. The two primary resources of the Slayer is Edge and Strike. Edge is a basic resource that recovers quickly over time, and Exmoor is a builder resource, while Strike is your secondary resource that fuels the primary spender. For our core abilities, let's start off with the Slayer's primary strike spender, Cloud Ripper. This ability can be held down to charge up to 3 levels, increasing its damage. Furthermore, this ability will consume all strike and increase the damage based off of the amount of strike consumed. The next ability is Solar Rider, and this attack is our basic edge spender, but on a surface level, this skill just simply lunges forward and deals moderate damage. However, depending on the type of build you want to play, this ability gets modified to either perform one of the following functions. It either generates a large amount of strike, or it creates 1 phantom per use. So an overall simple skill, but with high impact on our kit. Next we have Wind Cleaver, which is the Slayer's basic attack combo. This 3 attack combo deals pretty weak damage, but it generates strike on hit. However, this skill serves one important function, which is when you hit an enemy, you gain a stacking buff up to a max of 3, which increases the speed your Cloud Ripper charges up. Basically, this means when you're ready to unleash a big Cloud Ripper, make sure you have 3 stacks of this skill so that you can max your charge level quicker with Cloud Ripper. The next 2 skills are they kind of go hand in hand, and that's Killing Without a Trace and Phantom Storm. Killing Without a Trace is somewhat of a cooldown ability which deals a little bit of damage and it generates some strike, but most importantly it creates 4 phantoms. Phantom Storm, on the other hand, causes all active phantoms to dash to your target and attack. This attack can be comboed with other skills to deal a large amount of damage very quickly. In order to give you an example of how the Slayer plays, it's important to remember that it's very dependent on the first Astral Blessing you decide to use. Solar Rider is an important skill, and the first blessing greatly alters it to do what we want. When playing with the Sun Shooting style, the general playstyle will be to hit targets with massive Cloud Rippers. The playstyle for this type of build will look relatively simple, and that is to use Solar Rider to generate strike, and once you've stockpiled enough strike, unleash Cloud Ripper, which, thanks to Sun Shooting style, only needs to be charged up 1 level before it reaches its max damage instead of 3 levels. This means you won't have to use as many Wind Cleavers to generate the stacking buff, unless you're just out of edge and you need to generate strike. The other build style for the Slayer is the Phantom build, which, when you use the Swallow Hunt style blessing, the blessing causes your Solar Rider to generate phantoms. With this build, you will want to generate phantoms with Solar Rider and Killing Without a Trace. You will then command the phantoms to attack using Phantom Storm. With this build, you will want to continue to build strike with Wind Cleaver, and once you've generated a large amount of strike, you can combo Phantom Storm with a very powerful Cloud Ripper for some big damage. Moving on to the second spec, we have the Drunken Master. The Drunken Master is a tank role, and similar to the Slayer spec, the Drunken Master will be able to create phantoms to help fight. The primary source of mitigation will be through damage absorption shields and blocking attacks with a move called Headwind style. As for the primary resources, we once again have Edge, which is a basic resource that regenerates quickly over time and gets used for our damage mitigation abilities. The other resource used by Drunken Masters is called Intoxication. This resource is primarily used for high aggro generating abilities, but this resource will regenerate slowly over time. As for our core abilities, we once again have Cloud Ripper, and similar to the Slayer, the Drunken Master will be able to charge this attack up. The main difference though is when enemies are hit, the Drunken Master generates a damage absorption shield. Wind Cleaver is also accessible by the Drunken Master and functions similarly to the Slayer. In this case though, the Wind Cleaver's ability to reduce the charge time of Cloud Ripper is much more valuable. Next we'll get into the intoxication abilities, and first is Drink Up. This skill consumes 1 intoxication to deal pretty minor damage from a distance, however a large amount of aggro is generated, increasing the chances a target will attack you. Next we have Light Smash, and this consumes 1 intoxication to drop a pool on the ground. This pool will slow enemies, constantly deal damage, and generate a good amount of aggro when dealing its damage. So this is a good AoE grouping option for the Drunken Master. Next we have Rainbow Shadow, and this ability consumes 2 intoxication to create a phantom at a selected location. The phantom will taunt 3 random enemies around it, causing them to attack the phantom itself. In addition though, any enemies within the range of the phantom will receive an additional 6% damage from all sources, making this a great tool for any group. Lastly, we have Headwind Style, and I don't have any footage of this skill unfortunately, but by reading the description, we can get a good idea of how important the skill is to the Drunken Master. By consuming 45 Edge, so it's a little pricey, the Drunken Master enters a state in which they reduce incoming damage, generate additional aggro on enemies around you, and upon successfully blocking, there's a chance to regenerate health and allow the activation of a crowd control skill in a radius around you. Overall, this skill provides a lot of utility to the Drunken Master and it has no cooldown. It does, however, like I said, cost a lot of Edge, so the activation is probably going to be pretty limited. Unfortunately, I did not get a chance to test this tank out during the beta in any dungeon environments, so I don't really have any footage of the skills in action. But I think the overall playstyle is pretty simple and straightforward. When tanking a lot of mobs, use Light Smash if everything is kind of grouped up, or use Drink Up to get their aggro if they're spread out. Once all mobs have been collected, activate Headwind Style to mitigate damage while also gaining access to a crowd control effect when you block an attack. Being able to knock down enemies, preventing them from attacking you, will increase your survivability quite a bit. When you've run out of Edge, summon phantoms to taunt enemies off you briefly to allow you to recharge your resources. It might be important to note that the phantoms you summon may not be able to actually tank and taunt bosses. Once you have a healthy amount of aggro generated on all mobs and you're kind of feeling pretty healthy, feel free to use several Wind Cleavers and Cloud Rippers to just start dealing AoE damage. But of course, casting Cloud Rippers has the added benefit of also increasing your survivability with your damage absorption shields. And that's all I've got for the Berserker class. Personally, I think this is going to be the first class I plan on leveling up. As a primarily DPS player, I find both playstyles for Slayer to be very fun. The Phantom build feels like a high actions per minute spec, while the Cloud Ripper playstyle is a little bit more simplified but with big hits. As for the Drunken Master, I like the ability to support your team by debuffing enemies with your phantoms. Also, I really like the concept of entering a stance to block incoming attacks, healing as a reward for successful blocks. Let me know how you guys feel about the Berserker. I know I've heard that the Slayer is a difficult spec to play, but I think that's what also draws me to it the most. But I'm GooberTroy from Squad Up Games, reminding you all to squad up and have fun.